Hello, everyone. Welcome back to College of the Atlantic. Welcome to our 7th of 7 coffee and conversation of the season. Where has summer gone? I do not know. Glad to have everyone here today. My name is Sean Keeley. I'm a COA graduate. I'm also the executive director of our COA Summer Institute. And I know many of you enjoyed that this summer, along with these coffee and conversation sessions. There's always a few folks who are unfamiliar faces in the audience, so I'll just take a quick moment in case you're wondering what this college is all about to tell you that COA is coming up on its 54th academic year, which starts in just a couple of weeks when we'll welcome students back in full force. And we are a community of learners and doers and thinkers and shakers and all that. We really care about this planet. We care about our natural and built environments. And all of our students, about 350 of them, are pursuing a degree in human ecology. It's an interdisciplinary degree that brings all sorts of disciplines to problems, challenges, ideas, hopes, dreams, and all that. So that's a little bit about College of the Atlantic. So happy to welcome Sue and Tom to campus today. They've been in town for a little while, and we're so grateful that you've both joined us here. And we have Suzanne Morse, who's our interlocutor this morning. So I wanted to say a few words about Suzanne and thank you, Suzanne, for doing this and for agreeing to lead our conversation this morning. And Suzanne is our Rachel Carson Chair in Human Ecology, and she has been teaching with all of us here since 1990, teaching botany, agroecology. She is the sometimes I think thankless leader and manager of our community garden, which is just right across the way here. It's such an important part of the college. And I, was lucky enough to learn from Suzanne when I was a student as well. And I'll always remember that a seed is an embryo with a bag lunch from my time in Suzanne's classes. So the topic today couldn't be, I think, more central to some of the work that we do here at the college. Gardening, landscape design, farming and food systems has always been core to who we are. So I feel like this conversation touches down to our roots, but it's also so relevant for what we're doing, and I think will always be relevant to the study and the practice of human ecology here at COA. So I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne in a moment, but I just have a few details here to cover. One, please silence cell phones if you don't mind. Two, you'll notice that we have a table in the back there with copies of The Well Gardened Mind, The Restorative Power of Nature. This is Sue's book, and at the end of the session, she will sign copies and we'll have them for sale. So please stop by that table at the end. And lastly, I want to thank all of our donors who support College of the Atlantic, in particular our Champlain Society, which is really the heart and soul of our philanthropy program at COA. They make events like these happen, and of course, the rest of everything we do, and central to that is our students. So want to thank our donors, and if you're not a donor, please consider. It's easy enough. We've got lots of ways to give, so hit me up if you're interested. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, Suzanne, to begin this conversation. And thanks again, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see all of you here today. And it's just such a pleasure to have both Tom and Sue here, but I also want to put a little shout out and thank you to Yaniv Corman, who was a COA graduate who now currently works in Tom's studio. And so he was really instrumental in bringing us all together. And I just want to thank Yaniv wherever he is. There he is. Thank you very much for getting this to happen for us. As most of you probably know, Tom is a highly regarded English landscape architect and garden designer, and just last week was bestowed another award for an amazing disc. It looked like a discus that you received from the Beatrice Farron Society. He is an internationally acclaimed, he has an internationally acclaimed studio, which creates gardens that range from very expansive public parks to remarkable, small, intimate, private gardens tucked away in the City of London. Has many notable clients, and but what I really am struck by is sort of the ways in which he thinks about gardening and creating sort of transformational spaces that often can encourage people to think more deeply about their relationship to nature. Sue is the author of this fabulous book, which I'm going to come back to briefly, and distinguished psychiatrist, psychotherapist, and author known for discussing and revealing to all of us the healing power of nature. And a lot of this work is also grounded in very interesting science. And so this book is fabulous because it brings together sort of things about neurobiology, as well as really important, intimate stories about the healing power and transformational change for people. So together, they also cultivate gardens together. One, they've had what I believe is called the Barn Garden for over 30 years, but they've also started this new project, which is being illustrated behind us. And we're going to come back to the discussion about the design and the importance of this garden. But I would really want to start with a few questions to Sue about this book about the Whale Garden Mine. And this book covers so many different things, from the history of agriculture, the history of gardening, to stories about why gardens are really important for healing from different kinds of trauma, whether it's soldiers from World War II to current challenges that people face, familial challenges, and so on. As well as just recovering from grief and dealing with questions of poverty and hunger. So in short, this book covers a broad range of topics, and there's something there for everyone in this book. And but I really appreciate how detailed it is and how generous the book is in documenting the power of gardening and changing lives. And as I was reading this book and thinking about it, it was sort of challenging to figure out what is the theme that I would like to pick out so that we can start this conversation. But I've decided it's gardens versus gardening. And this book covers both of these things: the healing power of a garden and designing spaces that enable, say, if you're in a hospital, that actually improve your rate of healing, to being in the garden and having dirt under your fingernails. And so, Sue, my question for you is like, can you tell us a little bit about what you've discovered about the differences in the importance of each of these things, of a green garden and the greenness, and versus being actually active in garden and creating and working and growing and changing as the plants are changing in a garden?
Well, there is a distinction, obviously, because you can benefit hugely from a garden, from being in a garden without getting your hands in the earth. And obviously, when you are gardening, you're getting all the kinds of benefits that the person sitting enjoying the garden is also getting. So maybe we start with the garden. And I think, just to sort of try and put it in a nutshell, I think the first thing is that a garden is a place that's set apart in some way. There's always a sense of some kind of enclosure. You enter into a different world. And it's this sense of safety that people feel in a garden, which is so helpful, particularly for people recovering from trauma, for example, or for people going through treatment in hospital. Hospital gardens are enormously helpful. For anyone really who's spending any length of time in hospital and often having to adjust to big life changes and losses. So you've got that sense of sanctuary, of safety. You've also got all the benefits of green nature. And we know from the science of that, which is extremely well documented, that, that there are very direct effects on our cardiovascular system. So we get a slight lowering of our heart rate, our blood pressure. We, after about 30 minutes, levels of our stress hormone cortisol begin to decrease. So that benefit is shared with just walking in a parkland setting, if you like, but it is still happening in the garden. And I often think of gardens as places where we get a concentrated dose of beauty. And the effect of beauty in terms of nourishing the mind and nourishing the soul is really not to be underestimated. And we know from the kind of neuroscience around beauty that, that it activates when we have a beautiful experience. And that might be in any domain, actually. But the deep emotional centers of our brain are activated. And, you know, along with that, we get release of neurotransmitters, beneficial neurotransmitters like dopamine, our natural opioids, endorphins, and serotonin, our background feel-good hormone. So beauty is a form of nourishment. I've really come to believe that. And I think, you know, people go to gardens to experience beauty, and particularly the beauty of flowers, but all kinds of beauty in plants. So that's the sort of garden side of it. And of course, once the gardener gets stuck in, you're entering into a relationship of care. We live in a world, our current cultures, by and large, tend not to value care, tend to see it as often as a sort of lowly thing to be doing. And I think what we miss out when we don't appreciate how fundamental care is to our health, our well-being, is that in the brain, our care system, our nurturing system, is linked to two very important neurochemicals. One is the hormone oxytocin, which is our bonding hormone, and which actually very interestingly helps reduce the effects of the amygdala in the brain, which is what is firing when we feel fear, and in a disorder like PTSD, for example, it's very overactive. So it helps damp everything down. And the other system that it links into in terms of neurotransmitters is our endorphins. So we get a little endorphin hit when we're caring. So yeah, a little bit of a mood boost, feeling relaxed, just a nice, pleasant feeling. So care is very important for us to be able to express. And of course, when you're working with plants, that form of care is very different to the complexity of caring for people. You don't have to deal with their feelings or their moods, you know, and this came through really strongly in many of the interviews that I did with people on various projects. One was prisoners at Rikers Island, and for them, it was the relief of being in a relationship with a form of life where they didn't have to feel any shame. You know, that the plants couldn't have thoughts about them. And, you know, this world where we're bombarded by our texts and our messages and our emails and all sorts of things, so much kind of interpersonal communication needs to be processed by our brains. I think gardens have got more and more to offer us, really, in terms of getting away from that, entering into another domain. And of course, it gives people a very accessible way to be creative. And I think that's very, very important, that you can feel you are a creative being, that you are bringing something into the world. Other people can see it and you can share it with them. It's enormously affirming, that. And I think, yeah, to be a creative being is, I think, very helpful. And I see gardening as a very accessible way of being creative. And, you know, because we're working with nature's creativity. It's not like, we don't have to generate it all. We're harnessing that, we're working with it. So human creativity and nature's creativity come together in the garden. And I think that's very, very helpful.
So it's a kind of collaborate.
It's a collaboration.
Collaboration.
I think it's a, you know, of course, lots of gardens, particularly throughout history, have been all about domination of nature, control of nature. But, you know, in this age that we're living in, where we need to promote biodiversity and so on, it's much more about collaborating and not realizing you're not the only occupant of this garden or participant in it. You know, you're one of many different forms of life you know, for whom this garden is an abode, if you like. And I think that's very, very important. And, you know, the relationship to time is also a crucial part of gardening, because you have to work with the seasonal calendar, and you have to go through the cycle of life and death and come through the other side of it. And of course, that's why many people, if they are grieving or recovering from a great life change, why working with that process of change in nature is enormously helpful, and you can internalize something of, I think, nature's powers of regeneration, you know, and help yourself believe, oh, maybe, you know, maybe this can happen for me. Maybe I can recover.
Yeah, I always think of the garden as a metronome for my life, that I am so entrained to the seasons, and it's the one thing that I can always return to, regardless of what else is happening, whether it's a crisis or whether it's just sort of day-to-day life, that somehow it's always underneath and carrying you along through life. So
I think it also pulls you in,
Mhm.
because you can't procrastinate too much.
You can.
But then you pay for it, don't you? I mean, yeah, you can procrastinate a bit, but you have to work in nature's time frame.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for people who are struggling a bit with depression and anxiety, or people who are just very busy and struggle to fit their hobbies or whatever, you know, into their lives, garden is great, because you just simply, there comes a point where you just got to get out there and do it. You know, if you don't get your seeds sown, you're really going to miss it.
And seeds are wonderful for the hope and the expectation, and do I have the faith that the seed will actually germinate, are all things that I think are really great about sort of carrying you along and bringing you back out to the garden. It's not just a one-time event. But so one of the things that strikes me is this question of beauty. And to me, that comes back to questions of design and what the actual design of gardens are. And some, I would argue, are maybe more, for me, are more beautiful than others. And I know that's a very personal thing. It varies a lot. But I sort of want to turn to you, Tom, a little bit, because I understand that you've designed some hospital-based gardens in your life. And I'm just sort of curious about what you bring to that particular design, and is there anything different in designing those gardens than like designing the garden in front of the Tate, or you know, taking some large estate and or being in the dry deserts of Spain and trying to design? Is there something special or different for you in that process? What's similar and what's different, and how it touches on this question of beauty?
I mean, I think there are certain constants, like, you know, form, proportion, particularly proportion, balance, that run through all design. But I think, yes, I mean, designing gardens for hospitals is a very different exercise, and my experience is actually relatively narrow. I've only designed gardens for spinal injury and neurological injury departments in hospitals. And they have very specific needs. And I remember first going to, we have this amazing charity in the UK called Horatios, her objective is to design very, very high level gardens for all the spinal injury units in Britain. And I went with the person who set up this charity on the first day to have a look at this site where we're going to make this garden. And I didn't really know much about the special needs which spinal injury patients had. And we were outside in the old garden. I thought, well, this is actually quite nice. But there was, at the exit from the sort of mess room, where people who were in wheelchairs, not still in beds, and a lot of these patients were in beds for 9 months at a stretch, staring at a white ceiling. this is the threshold they had to come over to get into the garden. And there was a little weather bar to keep the rain out, which was about 1/4 of an inch high. And as this patient came out over this weather bar, this guy in his wheelchair went into a spasm, which lasted about, I mean, it was unbearable to watch. It lasted about a minute. And I thought, Jesus, we are just in different territory here. So yes, there are some very specific things, like all the surfaces have to be ultra smooth. There cannot be any, what would be, they're not trip hazards, they're sort of jolt hazards. We have specific things in this garden, like we have these amazing pods, which enable patients to be wheeled out in their beds into the garden, but be in a controlled temperature environment so that they're surrounded by nature on all sides. They're in the garden, but they have a roof over their heads and it's temperature controlled. And also their friends and family can come and sit with them in the pod. And that was something I also didn't realize at the outset, that this garden was as important for the family of the patients, almost as it was for the patients themselves. I mean, obviously it was ironic with this particular project in that a dear friend of Susan mine broke his neck about a month after we finished this garden. And through one means or another, we helped to get him transferred to this unit. And so it was ironic that he was in this garden that we had made. And I remember him saying to me, and he's quite a sort of particular guy, he said to me, Tom, it's not so much the garden that gives me such pleasure, it's what the garden brings with it. And what he meant by that was just the daily kind of parade of insects, of birds, of maybe a fox would come through, but also the activity of people's friends who would come, and all the people who would come and see him, who instead of being in a sort of gruesome ward, with all that brings with it, they would go out into the garden and they could be in this beautiful space, which was beautiful by anybody's standards, and everything felt more possible and more, people could think about the future. Whereas we all know when you go and see somebody in a hospital ward, you think, my God, is this it? Is this the future, And the context is so incredibly important. And I think certainly in the British health system, partly because it's so desperately cash-strapped, the ward environments tend to be pretty terrible. And so it's amazing for these patients to have this environment outside which they can go to. And I think that another thing which is part of that is and Sue refers to is constant change and development. So in this garden, we make sure there's always, we have a much more soft climate than you, that throughout the year there is something in flower. So patients can always go outside, and there's a story. They can sort of measure out their time in a way by what's happening in the garden, and there's always some change. It's never static. So we tend to avoid, the labor-saving ground cover plant. It's always going to be a lot more emphasis on flowers and on change, and on lots of flowers sort of almost occupying the same zone. So lots of bulbs in spring, and a succession of mainly perennials, and then sometimes quite late flowering trees, so that even in August, September, there's always something going on. So I think, at core, the principles are the same, but actually the details are very, very different.
So I'm very curious, listening to you speak about this and thinking about how has Sue's work influenced your design practice, or has it? It may not have, but I'm just sort of curious. I feel like when I listen to you sometimes, and I must say I went on quite a few YouTube videos to learn about a little bit about our guests here today, and sometimes it feels like there's a really psychological element to your design process. The more intimate spaces, moving into more wild, but I'm not. Maybe you always brought that to your designer, and whether it's working with Sue.
At all. I mean, I think we've been married for a long, how many? 39
years. Yes.
We married when we were very young. We met in our first term at Cambridge, the other Cambridge, one in England, and we've been friends ever since. And I think that Sue began doing an English degree, and I was doing natural science. I was reading zoology, and then we Sue decided to become a doctor, and about the same time I sort of decided to become a landscape architect. And and I remember in a wonderful way that there was that the English try to claim everything for themselves. You read a paper in your last year called the Moralist, or it's almost called the English Moralist,
Yes.
wasn't it? Which included Freud, a sort of honorary Englishman. I suppose he spent about 6 months in England at the end of his life. And so we've always discussed this kind of stuff. But I guess, yes, I mean, it sinks in osmotically. You're not, I don't sort of have a conversation and think, right, into the next garden that will go. We've been talking about this stuff for years, about the overlap of our respective territories where there is overlap. And there is quite a lot, really, because I think gardens affect you so much in a subliminal way. And there's so much about memory and connection with other places that you've been to, or ideas that you've read about in books or other places. So your response to the garden, if you're open to things from welling up from underneath, is never just as simple as you think it is.
Well, I think that I would like to move to the Serge Hill Project a little bit, because I feel like it's this really beautiful exemplar of combination of design and working in the garden, getting that soil under your fingernails. And I'm just really very curious if you could both sort of share each of your perceptions of the establishment of this project, and how it seems like it sort of came out, or certainly emerged during the time of COVID, and was that really influential in how you chose about going to do this garden? And when I feel like it's like a hub of all kinds of different kinds of activities, and how did you figure out how to put all of those things together?
Mm-hmm.
So those are questions for both of you about that.
Before COVID, actually.
Right. You started before COVID?
Yeah. And I think it grew out of two things, the project, partly my book. And for me, I think, well, maybe it's just worth telling a quick anecdote about when I was researching the book. Quite early on in my researches, I came to the States, and I visited a number of different projects and places. This particular memory happened in Chicago, and it was on a garden which is run by the Chicago Botanic Garden, called the Windy City Youth Harvest, which is a wonderful project working with at-risk kids who attend the garden like after school and then in the vacation times. And they grow vegetables, and they work together in groups, and they really learn a lot in different ways. I mean, not just about gardening, and they sell the produce in the market. And at the beginning of each session, there would be an icebreaker sort of group gathering, just throwing a ball around in a circle or doing various things. And at the end of this particular icebreaker moment, the therapist who was running the garden that day, Eliza, said, I want everybody to go around and say where they'd like to be, or what they'd like to be doing in 5 years' time, how do you envisage something in your life in that time scale? And I was about halfway around the circle, and it was sort of coming closer to me, and I was thinking, gosh, what am I going to say? Help. Because when you sort of go blank when you feel you're put on the spot. And then it got to me, and I said, I'd really like to set up something like this at home. And I sort of had a moment of feeling, whoa, where did that come from? It's not that I didn't mean it. I did mean it, but I hadn't actually, I'd been so impressed by the work that I was seeing. But I hadn't really had time to think about it, and certainly hadn't articulated this thought to myself. And it stayed with me. So and then I had to get back to finishing the research, all the slog of writing up and everything. And I think it did, it was like a seed for me. So we do very much, one strand of the project is very, very much focused on school children. In fact, it's quite an important part of the social and community aspect of the project. So we think we've had about 550 school children through visiting the garden really in about 15 months since we opened. And that's quite a lot more than we anticipated. So that's great. So that was one aspect of the kind of momentum to set this thing up. And I think the other was really to do with, for you, moving your studio out of London back to where we live at Serge Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the roots for me are quite go back quite a long way. I remember when I was a student, I didn't have I have to say, compared to what obviously happens at the College of Atlantic, in many ways, a very particularly inspiring landscape training. But there was one guy called Alan Ruff who took us to Holland in about, I would say, 1984. And he took us on the tour of these things called home parks. And they were these community educational gardens, generally situated in sort of downtown, slightly poorer parts of major Dutch cities in The Hague, Rotterdam, Delft, Utrecht, Amsterdam. And they were generally behind high netting, and they were spaces with natural gardens and then productive gardens. And I remember being there, and kids would come for one afternoon a week, and they would learn about environmental education, about the impact of our actions on the planet, and then they would spend 2 or 3 hours gardening. And at the end of the day, you'd see these kids, 8, 10-year-olds, going home to mum with a sack of potatoes on their back. And I thought, wow, this is really inspiring. There was nothing like this in the UK at the time. But it just didn't seem possible. But I very, very much banked that. And in my work, on a couple of occasions, I've tried to sort of, where there've been housing developments in projects, I've tried to sort of push that. But to find, philanthropic developers, it's almost, well, not quite a contradiction in terms, but it's quite challenging to find somebody with the kind of energy, because that's what it really needs, energy and commitment to set that up. So there was that side of it. And then I suppose the other thing, I mean, Sue said about, deciding to move the practice home, which in many ways is credit to our son, who ended up designing our building, because we were sitting around the, dinner table one evening, and we're talking about the future of my business and everything. And I was working in London, near the city, right, literally half a mile from St. Paul's Cathedral. And he said, I don't know why you don't bring the practice here and use this environment that you've created here as a sort of setting for your business. And I sort of paused, because I'd always felt that I didn't want my life and my business life to sort of be dumped on home, to sort of just take over everything. Because, we had a life there, but I mean, our children were growing up and they'd left home. And I think you said, before I was able to say, well, I don't know about that, I think that'd be a great idea. And that really was the opening to it. But I knew that when we came back and built a studio and had a design practice there, we just couldn't sit in a corner making money and, running a little business. We had to do something bigger. So that was how the whole discussion of it began. But it was absolutely because of Sue's book that the discussion began to take shape into what it's become. But even when we were building it, we still didn't know quite how it was going to form. And I'm a real believer in that you build these systems around the people who are there. And we've been really fortunate to recruit some amazing sort of girl power team. And they are now, as much as Sue is and as much as I am, driving the agenda forward, which is fantastic to see, this thing starts to take flight.
So can you tell us a little bit about the plant library? I just love the plant library. And everyone does. Oh, I guess. And maybe you could talk a little bit about these images, which are from the Serge Hill Project.
Well, shall I say a little bit about plant library and then you say how it works?
This is just kids in the plant library, isn't it? Visiting. visiting. Yeah, why don't you talk about the plant library, because then I could say a bit about how the plant library contributes to the schools program.
I mean, the plant library is kind of what it says it is. It's a grid of plants. There are about 2,500 now. And they have you can find out where everything is. So you go up to a group of plants which are grown every plant occupies a square meter, a little bit more than a square yard. Some occupy nearly two square meters, so 2 by 2. And on the corner of each plot of plants, there is a QR code. So you click onto that and you find out what you're looking at.
This is planting it.
So this is a very, very early on, planting the first section of it. So you can see how we're just laying out the squares with string, and then each plot is planted with one plant, and nothing is ever repeated. And we began this really as yeah, there we are. There's an aerial view of it. Yeah. And you can see perhaps there that the top half nearest me is all planted through sand, and much of it is planted through this much sand and gravel, so no soil at all. And we're great advocates for that, because it's putting plants under stress actually makes them perform much better.
You flower when you are under stress.
I know. Well, for instance, this top section under sand, we never water, never been watered since it's planted. The bottom section on compost, we have to water constantly, because the roots are so much more surface rooting. The moisture levels fluctuate between being quite wet and being quite dry. So they're much more subject to mildew, much more subject to other diseases. In the sand, the roots go much deeper. The root systems are infinitely larger. I mean, like 10 times larger, because they really have to hunt for moisture. And what it means is that when drought does come, they're actually much more resilient, because the levels of moisture in the sand, if it's the right kind of sand, very coarse sand, are much more stable. But that's a bit of a detail. But you can see there how it kind of, the pattern of it. And it came about because originally I was thinking that maybe all my staff should have a plot of their own, and they should curate this and learn about gardening and growing plants. And on the very first day of lockdown, when Boris Johnson, bless his cotton socks, declared lockdown, all these plants turned up in a great lorry. And so me and one of my directors, Ed, we had to set out about 7,000 plants. It just in a trench, because we weren't even supposed to be sort of near each other. And we realized as we were unloading these plants that lots of people had ordered all the same things. Of course they had, because they bought the latest fashionable plants that they wanted to see how they were sort of backlit with a bit of grass next to them. And we thought, oh no, this isn't really the best learning thing. What we want is maximum diversity. And then the other thing I realized we wanted was something not hierarchical. So you didn't want something which was obviously designed by me or actually by anybody else. If you're going to invite and engage with lots of volunteers and lots of other people, you really want them to feel that this place is their own. And I do think that is more difficult if you've got big designer boss up here and then lots of underlings sort of scurrying around looking after his masterpiece underneath. So that's how we came about this system, which can be very easily taken on by somebody else. So now Millie, our wonderful head gardener, she makes most of the decisions. I just look at it and say, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And we have various underlying rules, like you never put an iris next to an iris, you never put a grass next to a grass. And that's partly because we're working with this amazing charity, local charity, which is called Sunnyside Rural Trust, which is a charity which employs about 180 adults with learning difficulties, so really profound autism and Asperger's. And they employ them as workers in a nursery where they grow plants from our plant collection and sell them to the public. And sell some of them back to us. So there's a rather nice circular system. It's only been up and running for 6 months.
There is,
but it's really, yeah. There's one slide, I think. So this is that one before was our garden. This is the plant library in spring, later
this
summer.
This is the building designed by our son.
Just being finished. Yeah. It's not quite complete yet. But as a very good principle, we made the garden before we finished the building. This is always a very good thing to do. Get your priorities right. And that's pretty much what it looks like now. with our terrace and the big stone pot, which all the local children who are under 3 foot love to jump into and hop out of. And you can probably see that the building also expresses something quite central about what we're doing and who we are. So the cladding is made from local oak trees within about 150 yards of the site. And you chop them down and then split them like a cake, like that, by hand, all done by hand in the old way that buildings were clad before the advent of metal saws. So medieval buildings were always clad in this vertical way. It sheds the water off much better. It's a lot of work, but I think we've always thought that we're happier to put money into people than into buying stuff. And that I feel is a central principle of what we do. I'm very reluctant to spend money on things because you know they don't involve people who you know and who you can form relationships with. And that, I think, goes right against the prevailing ethos that people are very, very happy to do capital spending on gardens. The idea that you spend money on gardeners to look after it, you know, I mean, and this is just completely a wrong approach. I think it's an amazing privilege to employ gardeners. And we actually now employ, in our garden and in this, we employ between the community interest company, which runs this thing, and our garden, I think we employ 6 gardeners now. And that's a completely disproportionate to our income and the resources, but something nevertheless to be celebrated as long as we can manage to do it.
Excellent. Would you like to speak a little bit to your?
Yes, I think the wonderful thing about the plant library is, which I don't think we fully envisaged really, you know, it felt like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. It's a great idea. But it was still very uncertain about, you know, yes, it'll be a great learning tool for people who want to see how plants grow, how they behave, how they flower. But as soon as we started having kids coming in the garden, we realized it was just brilliant, whatever age you are, because the grid system allows people just to wander freely. And particularly in summer, the plants are very tall. And this wonderful sense of immersion, you know, if you're small, you're right close to the plants. So it works as a sensory garden, particularly when you're at that level, but actually for adults too. There's a lot of scented plants in it, aren't there? There's amazing insect life in it. We've got an ecologist who's helping us map that. And so all the diversity and complexity of the plants has kind of brought a very rich ecology with it, and that's still happening very much. So I think one of the illustrations up there is some little paintings of insects, and we had a day collecting insects in putas in the plant library, and then this was actually with a group of young people with learning disabilities, and then afterwards doing various craft and artworks with them. But I guess it's all about how to connect children particularly and young people with nature. I mean, living where we do, we've got something like 350,000 people or more within 10 miles of us. We've got 3 towns, quite significant towns. They've all got large areas of deprivation within them. There are many, many children living in our part of Hertfordshire who don't have a garden, or if they do, don't even get out in it much. And who don't really understand how food grows, where potatoes come from, or strawberries or tomatoes and so on. So there's a lot that we can do in that way. And we have, I don't think there's a photo of the vegetable plots, but we also have some vegetable plots for our schools. And, you know, seeing little kids, like our primary school, so these are children aged about 7 and 8, you know, coming back to harvest the squash plants that they'd first of all sowed. And these little kids refusing to be helped to carry this squash because they're so proud of it, you know, struggling with it.
Can you ever plant enough carrots for them, though? That's the question.
Yeah. But feeling that sense of ownership that Tom spoke about, that actually that sense of, oh, you know, that I understand this place now, and you know, they really connect with it.
Well, thank you so much. I know that there are several members of the audience here who already have your book, who have written many things in the margins, as well as are just really interested in garden and garden designs. And I think I would really want to make sure there's a little bit of time for questions. I have many questions like plant blindness, but we can discuss that at another time. All right.
Great. So starting in the back with Katie back here.
Thank you for this program. On behalf of all of us here in person and online and all the other people who have enjoyed these sessions, I just want to thank COA, Sylvia, Sean, everybody, the chefs in the kitchen, everybody who has put this on for us. It's a great gift to the community, and we appreciate it very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Hi, I'm Irene Barber. I'm a horticultural therapist, and we're called HTRs when we're registered as horticultural therapists. And I was officially the HTR at Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens for 15 years. And I am now going on my own to explore HT, bringing it to more diverse populations, populations who can't come to these destinations that we create, which are beautiful, but it becomes another limitation. So I was curious, you were mentioning how you are in a community that is surrounded by diverse or larger populations. Good for you guys. We have very small populations here in Maine. And I was just curious about your experiences of philanthropic achievements on getting funding to get populations to come to your facility, and what hurdles you may have still to this day getting people to come to your destination. And have you ever explored the idea, I know you're only 6 months into it, but have you ever explored the idea of going on the bus?
Well, we do have an outreach program, but that's very new, and it's very much in response to what you're talking about. And we were lucky to get a grant to enable us to do that. So we have an education coordinator who visits local schools and helps them make the most of whatever garden or patch that they've got. And the idea, what I would really like for us to sort of establish is that maybe a class of kids can visit and sow seeds, or, you know, pot on some seedlings or something. And then a few months later, we can take those plants back, because often there isn't time in the curriculum for them to come for a second trip. We also now have a transport fund, again, thanks to a very generous trust that gave us a grant. So I think we're really aware of that. But I like the idea of the sort of to and fro model, not just doing outreach, but having a sort of a base, a hub, exactly, and that we can then go out from that. And I think, yeah, that's work in progress. We've actually been open for about 14 or 15 months now. And we've only started doing the outreach work in probably the last, I think it started in May. So we haven't been going that long, and we've got some more schools lined up in the autumn term. But everybody seems, the head teachers all seem very keen on that. Because you're right, I mean, it's partly taking time out of the curriculum for people to come, but it's also the cost of transport, which we can help with. But you know, it's expensive, even if it's not very far. You have to hire the coach for the whole day or the whole half day.
And I think the whole thing of philanthropy is you know, is a big deal. I mean, for us, I think we're flush with beginner's luck to some extent. You know, while I've always been quite reluctant to make direct approaches to any of my clients, I've always told them what we're doing, and some of them have trusts, and have then come back and said, well, you know, this sounds very interesting, put in an application to the trust. So we have, in this initial period, been very reliant on, I mean, there's absolutely no way we could have done it on our own. So what happens 2-3 years down the line when possibly, you know, that beginner's luck is less, less, you know, we're over the first flush of enthusiasm. And I think undoubtedly we have to become probably more self-reliant and generate more of our own income, which we do by, you may have seen some, well, this is an event. This was an event we did last year, didn't actually make much money.
That's the problem.
It was called Working with Earth. It was about, I mean, the College of Atlantic would have loved it. It was about using materials like hemp and earth and rammed earth and lime to make buildings and all that. And it probably could have made money, but it was our first one and we weren't quite so savvy. And we're doing another one this year, which is working with water, which is a 2-day event, you know, everything to do with water. But then we do have a number of talks, and we've been very lucky, you know, because the landscape world, by and large, is full of very, very generous people. So in our first year, we, you know, Peter Outdorf came over, Peter Korn, I can't remember.
Fergus Garrett.
Maybe, you know, Fergus Garrett. We're going back a week after we get back. Sarah Raven, you know, brilliant gardener is coming. So the world is full of very, very generous people who are happy to step up if they see something which they sort of want to check out and be part of in a small way. And let's just hope that continues.
You've both spoken eloquently about the connection of mind and body in the garden. And the third element that I'm interested in gardens when I visit is spirit. And I wonder to what extent each of you weaves that thread through, and what are the elements that bring spirit into a garden?
I agree with you completely, and I was very struck researching my book about the range of ways that people spoke about that effect. Some of the people I interviewed, and I quote in my book, really talked very directly about finding God in the garden. For other people, it was something much sort of softer, sort of vague, I suppose, spiritual, really sort of right down to feeling a deep sense of connection with the universe. So there was a big spectrum. They wouldn't even necessarily use a religious term or a spiritual term, but they would talk about feeling this connection, this sense of connectedness. So I think there's a huge spectrum. And I think you can, you know, I don't think you have, I think you, when you're gardening, you can experience it, but I think you can absolutely experience it through being in a garden, through beauty, that sense of transcendence, and that sense of feeling part of a greater whole. I think it's one of the most profound things that gardens do for people. And of course, gardens have a very long history of being linked to religious institutions and religious symbolism and so on. I'm thinking about Islamic gardens, the paradise gardens, but also the early monastic gardens, the medieval monastic gardens, which were very much sacred and healing spaces. So I think it's very, very important. And I think it's quite hard always to know how to articulate it. It also gets completely lost in the research because it's extremely difficult to quantify. So I think it's underreported as a result, but I think it's a very, very important effect.
Yeah, I think it's a very, this question of spirit in the garden is a very interesting thing. I mean, I'm not a believer in God, but I am a believer in things having sort of almost intangible qualities that are very difficult to articulate. Actually, Yannick and I went for a walk up on the beehive in the fog. We were up on the top yesterday, and you couldn't see anything other than the silhouettes of the pine trees and the granite, and that, you know, that is as extraordinary experience as you will get in a garden. But I do think that one thing that perhaps us garden makers should strive to do more, and it's partly about engendering this sense of spirit, is is to cultivate the sort of otherness of garden spaces, that so many of our gardens made are kind of external commodifications of space. You know, they're gardens with things in them, with barbecues and things to do, and actually, centrally, to me, a garden is a release from self and from possessions. I mean, it's almost a sort of Buddhist-like experience that you want to be in this space that has a quality of its own. Now, I mean, formal gardens can do that in the same way that informal gardens can do it. It doesn't have to be, there isn't an absolute template for it, but what a garden has to have is this quality of entireness and almost as if it has its own momentum, that you're in this space and you stop and you think, good heavens, this just has, it is a place of its own. And we all know those experiences. They're not all necessarily garden related. They can be when you go into somebody's room when they're not there and you think they are here. You know, they have a presence. It can be, you can get it in some old cities. You can get it, you can experience it in nature. But it is a sense of the sort of palpable here and now that you grasp at, and we're all sort of searching to grasp at this moment, which then slips between your fingers and disappears. So I feel that I wouldn't actually define it myself in terms of spiritual, but it's more about this elusive quality of a place being itself.
I noticed in one of the images, there was a boxwood with very sharp edges, which I thought must be box. Anyway, it had very sharp edges. I applaud you for not using plastic or metal fencing, but does that have an educational value?
Absolutely no idea.
We better scroll through
We
them
were going to stay
quickly.
here for 5 minutes and look at all the pictures.
Picture.
Very formal. Ah,
Maybe.
okay. I don't think there's any boxwood in the aerial view of the gardens. That there's no box. Not this one. That
Home garden.
that's a home garden.
That's our home garden.
So that is no, that is we don't really grow that much box anymore because of
That's the
the
vegetable.
double whammy of box blight, which I know you have here, but also we have the moth. I don't think you have the moth here, do you yet? Your winters are too
Yeah.
cold. So we do have some box. Actually, there's some box in the far left-hand corner in front of the greenhouse.
You can see where the project is in the middle top of the screen. You can make out another roof and the sand. You look right at the top. So, and this is our home. So this garden's much, much older. We started in the late 80s, early 90s here.
And are those straight lines?
No, they're hornbeam, so carpinus, and yew, the Taxus baccata. Not sure. Yeah.
Shauna, where are we in
Why
our?
don't we have one more question and then we can wrap up?
Okay.
Okay, I'll just, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah. I figured it would be a great way of advertising.
It's funny, you know,
To see your place. You want to explain who Monty Don is, because not everyone knows. Don.
Monty Don is the thinking gardener's crumpet, as we say. If you know the English phrase crumpet, which means sort of somebody tasty. In fact, he's the same age as me, and we've known Monty for I don't know, 40 years maybe. He came to this garden when it was just little twigs coming out of the ground, and he thought, interesting. And we have many parallels in our life. This man, you know, who's a sort of broadcasting sensation, because we're the only two people we know who started making a garden in our 20s and are still at it on the same plot 35 years later. So we have a lot, and in fact, we did an in conversation a bit like this
At the Design Museum.
in London at the Design Museum just about a month ago. So in fact, he's not been, no. I know, of course we should, but he's a difficult man to pin down with a very full diary. So I'm sure he'll come at some point. Yeah, I mean, it gets quite a lot of publicity anyway. So I think one has to sort of space out one's treats to some extent, you know, otherwise you get a blast of publicity and everybody says, oh, I don't want to publish that because, you know, you've seen that. So yes, no, we're keeping Monty on a
It's an open invitation. Sure, doesn't he? He knows that.
He knows where to find us. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll wrap up here, and thank you so much for joining us. Just about. So as we close out our session today, don't forget there's books in the back that Sue will head back there to sign shortly. And I want to just, as we close the summer here, I want to pick up where Katie left off. She thanked Sylvia and I for putting together the program, but I also want to give shout out to some key folks like Zach Soares, who's back here every week running the tech, like Cora Carvalho y Silva, who's our director of internal events. And then this year's summer interns, we had Maddie, Maxie, and Keegan. So can't do this without them. Huge thanks to all of them. And thanks, everybody. It's been a wonderful summer. Stick around. If there's more coffee, enjoy it. Otherwise, we'll see ya.